It's kind of crazy that, give or take a few stars and comets, the night sky that we stare up at is the very same one that our ancestors have been watching for hundreds and hundreds of years. Light travels at almost 300 million meters per second, and still the astronomical map that we have shared with all of humanity has barely changed in all of our history. Each one of us sees the world differently. Light refracts and enters our eyes, which then takes that raw information and categorizes it into objects and understanding based on our own growing library of things we understand. We all have our own library, and therefore we all have our own interpretations of the world around us. But the raw information is static. There are objects in reality around us, of course. We may experience them through different means and ideas, but we know they are there. We all have our own view of the night sky, but that view must stem from something based in reality. What is the difference between the two? Our individual perceived reality or the static factual reality? To explore deeper, we will look into two different pieces of media depicting the night sky: a painting made by human hands through their own veil of experience, and a photograph, a static, more exact representation of the baseline. My name is Gavin Smith, and my course question is, how do visuals and images communicate to the
At
viewer?
the edge of a universe humming a tune, for merely dreaming we were snow.
First, I'd like to dive into photography, specifically a long exposure photograph of the full solar eclipse that occurred on April 20th, 2023, at which the apex of totality makes the sky take on some characteristics of twilight. Taken by Simon G. and Vijay Kumar as an entry for the 2023 Princeton University Art of Science Expedition. This piece is titled Eclipse over Maine. Exposure in photography is the number of data pieces a modern digital camera collects over a given amount of time, which are then combined together to create a final photograph. Usually the period of time in which these bits are collected are fairly swift, only a fraction of a second, but in long exposure photography, you can create photos like this, creating a step-by-step like effect. This piece is neat. A total solar eclipses don't happen too often, and this is a very cool method to capture the entire experience. But in reality, the eclipse isn't spread out like this. It happened in real time, with this image being an exaggeration of the true event. Still, this photograph depicts mostly reality. The moon and its copies we see here the very same moon that was seen in the sky at this exact place on April 20th, 2023. This is not much of an exaggeration, more of the combined frames of the event. When you look at it this way, something becomes apparent. This is more or less the same visual data we would have seen if we ourselves stood here on that day. This event happened, and we are seeing it as if it were happening in front of us, something that humanity, most of its greater history, was incapable of. This photograph was not stained by the veil of human interpretation, communicating directly to us what happened and what exists. Regardless of our presence in the moment, this continues to show us what happens. This is a fact. Cameras and photography fit in with today's world, but it really was not that long ago we created this false electronic eye. While the idea of using light to copy the world around us dates back to the age of ancient Greece, the first known photograph comes from a practice called heliography, which is defined via the Encyclopedia Britannica, thank you, as the process of taking light through a special lens and imprinting it upon a light-sensitive material. In about 1826, a French inventor by the name of Nicephore Niepce, responsible for the invention of the process, created the first image of the landscape outside his window over the course of about 8 hours. This was the basis of the photograph, still in part used today in our digital cameras that detect the different wavelengths of light and impose them onto an image. The false eye sees perfectly, an inhuman accuracy to represent its recounted events. So perfect, if you never knew the technology beforehand, you might mistake yourself for being there. But there is something wrong with this vision. In our memories, our interpretation of the world, there's something that this photograph does not have. Look closely. Notice anything? It's frozen. The wind does not blow. The temperature does not graze your skin. The eclipse does not start or end. It's stuck. We don't just view the world as static images. We have experience and ideas that glue together the raw information of the world around us. Someone who was here may not remember just the static eclipse, but the state of change, the blowing wind, the cold. In sharing their perspective, they integrate the perception of their experience. A camera does not have ideas, nor experience. It simply takes the raw information and spits it out onto a page. We see the eclipse, but do we experience it in the way the camera does? It's uncanny to see what we know should move, but does not. There's too little information. We can assume the photograph is a reliable narrator of reality at the time of its taking, but we cannot know the experience of being there. The wind won't blow on our skin, the cold won't make us shiver, the light show in the sky won't make us gasp. We see everything as it was, unfeeling. Maybe there's too much information about the what and not the who. Now for something from more organic hands. This is a famous 1680s painting from Dutch artist Leva Verschaer, in English titled The Great Comet of 1680 over Rotterdam. It depicts the aforementioned comet flying over the city in the Netherlands. The comet's also known as Kirch's Comet because it was the first one ever discovered by telescope before it was visible by the human eye. Leeuw, who lived in Rotterdam and was famous for his maritime paintings, was out in the town that night when it came by. Leeuw, who lived in Rotterdam and was famous for his marine paintings, was out in the town that night during a period in which the comet was most visible. Fascinated, he captured the comet and the people in his art style reminiscent of the golden age of paintings. David A.J. Sargent's The Greatest Comets in History has more detailed accounts of the comet. Quoting from the book, by the end of November, it had evolved into a striking naked eye spectacle. According to J.D. Ponthio, some 15 degrees of tail were visible from Rome on November 27th, and 2 days later, lengths of between 15 and 20 degrees were estimated by Arthur Storer, observing from Maryland in North America. I'm also a large fan of this piece. The people looking up at the sky while the comet trails onward have a sense of awe, giving light to the town and its citizens. There is a warmth that the people share while watching the comet underneath the late November sky. It's truly a great artwork of its time. But how do we know this is real? I mean, is this really what happened on an unknown day in November 1680? I don't mean the event. I mean this exact scene. In the center of the crowd, we see a child and their parents looking up at the sky, admiring its beauty. Did Leeuw really capture such an event, or is this part of his artistic expression of the moment? As stated before, the world is seen through our own eyes. Data plus experience is what creates the concept of the known. But while the data is the same, the experience often differs. If another experienced painter of the day studying Rotterdam on that evening, equally struck with inspiration, what would differ between Leeuw's painting and this new hypothetical one? Paintings can't be captured instantaneously. It requires an artist to fill in the blanks of their idea of what should be there, compared to the hours of time it takes to compose it. Maybe the same sky would be on the canvas, but a different interpretation of the people on the streets, and a different configuration, maybe a different coloring choice, or maybe a different specific point in time entirely. The people in the painting may never have even existed, based solely on Leeuw's personal idea of the townsfolk who sees the comet as he does. Unlike the photograph, this painting has a human element to it that brings back the warmth of the moment. But now the scale has tipped the other way. What we gain in life, we lose in reality. We have the sum of the experience and information, but neither of the parts on their own. We will never know what this night sky truly looked like with our own eyes. We may have technology that could simulate an image or many accounts and paintings like this one, but we can't turn back the hands of time. We can only see through the eyes of Leeuw, a once living man who took creative liberties to create a masterpiece, and in turn became an unreliable narrator for his reality. Both of these artifacts depict the night sky. Specifically, both depict non-standard astronomical events, one being a total solar eclipse, and the other being the passing of a comet. Each was created on a real event. Each uses special techniques to capture the event as the creator intended. In this instance, both were created over a period of hours. All in all, both can largely be considered art. The main key difference is their human exclusive attributes, by hand or by machine. Leeuw imprinted his personal experience, his humanity on his painting, like most paintings today. We get to see his own experience. Simon and Viev took their photograph using some special techniques to show the moon over time, but the photo is largely unedited, without their veil of the human experience. We are left to add that ourselves, but this works the other way around. Photographers edit and modify their pictures to convey their own meaning, and painters use different techniques and styles, sometimes even abstract, to force us to find understanding. How do we discern meaning from each? Is it our job to understand art or an artist's job to create understanding? We have to explore deeper into how humanity sees this type of artwork, the visual culture of the night sky. Our textbook this semester, The Visual Culture Reader, defines visual culture as a sort of alter reality, defined by what we choose to see as compared to what is truly there. In a quote, seeing is a great deal more than believing these days. Visual culture is what humanity collectively makes of reality. In class, we explored many examples of visual culture through photography and artwork, from new and from old. In the context of these discussions, we get a chance to step out of the shoes of ourselves and into the shoes of many different types of people. Not even just artists, but scientists, writers, engineers. How do we apply this to paintings and photographs? We can start with a simple question. How do they make us feel? Our photograph is a part of an exhibit from Princeton University, a winning piece in their 2023 Art of Science competition. Our painting is currently in a museum in Rotterdam, one of the most famous works from Liev on display to all. In turn, it's argued that at least a couple different people found both of these pieces appealing. Now, given I am biased, I love space. So don't we all? When you were young, didn't you ever look up and ask questions about the stars? Maybe claim you'd be an astronaut one day. Space is mysterious, and we can't easily learn much about it. And that makes it so interesting. It makes us feel small. It reminds us that there is so much out there. Another angle we can look at is how the ideas of space have existed in our past. There are numerous examples of humans' relationship to the sky, one of the most interesting being the Never Sky disk, one of the oldest known depictions of the astrological world. In a short talk with researchers from Scientific American, a few experts in the history of astronomy's relationship with human history, also known as archaeoastronomers, talk about the Never Sky disk. One of the researchers, Amelia Pastor, believes the disk was likely a symbolic representation of the cosmos rather than a practical tool, actually leading into our next interesting artifact. The armillary sphere is a depiction of the heavens by Greek and Roman understanding. These were intended to showcase the Earth's connection to the heavens and the constellations. Of course, tens of thousands more examples exist, but these two ring out in particular. The first is pretty simple, but it shows a clear understanding of the day-night cycle, probably created by one curious young human. The next gives insight to how the sky played into some of our earlier theology, and how it's always been an interest to humans' attempts to understand the nature of the world. With today's modern comforts, we often forget that for most of human history, the sky was an unobtainable feat. It became the heavens, unreachable by living man, and takes form in most religious groups in some way even today. What is beyond the clouds is a very, very old question. It's so old it predates many systems of thought and understanding. It is a universal curiosity. But how does this relate to our question? Paintings are an artist's creative representation of some concept. Sometimes that concept is reality. Photography is a photographer's creative representation of reality. Sometimes this is a concept. In this modern age, it becomes harder and harder to distinguish concepts and reality, especially in relation to the modern trend of generative AI. We touched on this semester, and in review, it brings light to the concept of trust. How can we trust that what we see is true? In this digital age, photographs and art come in forms of beams of light and radio waves across the globe into our digital screens. But this artificial imposter has become pretty good at imitating both. They are forced to share space and leave us to determine the difference. Lots of these generated images are uncanny in a way. I used this word earlier, but it comes from the term the uncanny valley, the human mental response to something that looks human but isn't quite. Most likely a leftover primal instinct from the pre-Homo sapien era, when there was a bunch of different types of pre-humans running around. Look at a generated AI image. I'm not going to show you one because I feel it's immoral to encourage the use of generative AI for reasons that are long and complicated and I won't get into right now. But please pause and search for a generated image of the night sky. If you really look, something starts to feel wrong. We are missing something critical to this form of art. You can tell, just inherently. It's missing its humanity. In that we see the light of the answer. We can finally understand how photography and painting differ. Photographs are frozen, yes, but somebody put the camera there. Someone took the photo. Someone thought this is interesting and worth capturing. The same goes for paintings. Someone sat down and determined that something was worth creating. The art piece is not the determiner for something that is human, it's the artist, the intention behind it. At its heart, it's the difference between painting and photography. At its heart, the difference between painting and photography is merely medium, simply the type of artist. Their ideas create the visual culture. Their ideas are what communicates to the viewer. The sum of the ideas is the artist plus the experience of those who choose to observe the art. There are so many depictions of humanity in their final frontier. After the space race ended in the late 60s, this worm that weaseled into our collective consciousness decided to stick around. We got a few dozen programs across the globe dedicated to the scientific exploration of the heavens. We have thousands of paintings and photographs of that abyssal, diamond-speckled darkness that covers us at night. Paintings of humans on Mars, movies about aliens who can throw people with their minds, pictures of Earth from satellite stations. We've grown to love our astronomical neighbors. Art is subjective. No two people are going to think the exact same thing about a photograph or painting. Maybe you're not a big fan of the two artifacts I talked about and wish I picked two pieces related to plants or cities or portraits. Millions and millions of art pieces are out there. And even in the short time that camera technology has existed, the number of photographs have blown by the numbers of paintings due to how easy it is to just pull out your phone and take a picture. What matters is how you feel about the visuals. How does a picture speak to you? How does a painting drive your thoughts? You give meaning to art. Visual culture is what we see versus what is there. What you see in your own veil of ideas and experiences and existence of being human is how images communicate to you. In my case, both these artifacts make me feel a longing. I want to see the heavens that so many humans across the ages have seen. I want to know what's up there. How do visuals and images communicate to viewers? They don't. They ask you to communicate with them, to consider someone else's experience for just a moment and invite their feelings into your own, to add their experience to yours and encourage you to share your experience onward, to add your ideas to the knowledge of humanity's visual culture. I wonder if one day, sooner or later, we will get up to the sky. We will get up beyond the clouds, beyond the moon, into the universe, and discover if maybe our dreams are not that far off from reality.